Hey guys, Andy N, spoken late. Back in the house, Sunday afternoon. It's gorgeous, but it's freezing where I am today. So I've got about 4 layers on at the moment. So we're over to, I think it's Disbury today, if my memory is correct. And,
Technically Stockport, but
oh, Stockport, yeah.
I can see Didsbury out my front door.
No, we've got a gentleman with me today. I've known the gentleman, a few years now. And we've got the wonderful Adrian. How do I pronounce your surname, Michelle? I've got this right.
It's Slatcher, so
Slatcher,
I always
that's it,
say
yeah.
it's like Thatcher with an SL, which is not
That's
great,
what I
is
thought.
it?
I thought it was. Yeah, that's why I want to make sure I've got that right. So we've got the wonderful Adrian Slatcher with us today. Now, Adrian, I think I first met you at Speakeasy, didn't I? Before me and Steve and Amanda took it over some years ago. Oh, good God.
Yeah, well, when I think it was Dave Hartley who
Yeah.
originally started it, and I got a really good friend Karen who lives in Old Trafford, and
Mm.
I said to her, oh, do you fancy going over to this new place? Because I'd heard it was like quite a funky little venue, which it was,
Yeah, it
and
was. Yeah,
I'd
much
like to
missed.
tour it. Yeah, so we went there and had a couple of boozy spoken word nights, I think. And obviously, unfortunately, Sit Club disappeared. But yeah, it was always really well attended because I think Dave lived quite nearby at the time. I'm not sure if he still does. But yeah, it was. I've always found that spoken word nights in the burbs are kind of a bit better because they're midweek, etc. Whereas in town, it's kind of there's so many other things competing.
Yeah, no, you did right. But when you look at like where Speakeasy was, it was like because I'm from Stretford originally. That's how I first found out about it. Because my mum came back with a leaflet from Stretford Library,
All
which
right.
was around the corner from it. And I said, "Oh right, that's not bad. I can get there and stop at theirs." Afterwards, I don't see tons of my mum and dad anyway. So, but then later on, I met Amanda and took over along. So yeah, and then people wanted to get Sit went. We took it over. Me, Amanda, and Steve. We're in Cholton now. So, but anyway, Adrian, we're here to talk about you today, my friend. So, um, now there's a lot of ground, as I said, we've talked about already. We could cover you here, but we're here to talk about your new book, Loners, really. But I think we need to give people a little bit about yourself first of all, don't we? So, and I don't know how you can do this in a few in a couple of minutes, but tell us a bit about yourself, where your creativity came from originally.
Yeah, well, I'm from the Midlands. There's probably a little hint of me black
Got
country
it then.
accent
Got
still
it then.
still
Yeah.
in there. Um, um, it was always really difficult growing up because I'd mentioned where the village I came from, and no one had heard of it because it's a little village called Norton Keynes in Staffordshire. But they built a bloody motorway through it, didn't they? And the service station on that motorway on the toll road is Norton Keynes. So now people have heard of it because they stop off there for a Big Mac or whatever and go to the loo. They built it over my dad's bowling green, which he wasn't very happy about. So yeah, so I kind of grew up in kind of Staffordshire, well, it's on the edge of the conurbation, but I went to Lancaster University I'm in my late 50s now, God. But yeah, I went to Lancaster University and always really read a lot and wrote a lot. I did an English degree. But after graduated, I got kind of uh, real jobs. Bizarrely, I was a computer programmer, which is a bit odd with an English degree. But I was kind of doing it as a means to an end. I thought, well, it's a well-paid job. Maybe I can afford a computer to write my novel on. And fast forward a bit to the mid 90s, and I was shortlisted for a prize for unpublished novels. Something called the Litchfield Prize, which was Litchfield's very near where my parents are, and so that was the first time really that people outside of my friends and family had ever read my work because you honestly think you're crap and don't know if you're any good at all. And so that was the first time that had ever happened. And of course, it's a bit worrying that because you suddenly go, right, okay, book a prize next, don't you?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so I decided to do it seriously. I really needed to have some time and also contact. I'd never ever met another writer really, and so I went and did a creative writing course at University of Manchester in '97, and it was called a novel writing MA, and there are only about half a dozen in the country at that point. And people say, "Oh, what's the point of doing an MA?" And I think people don't realise that if you've not got the background where your life is full of creative people. If you work as I did as a computer programmer, you're lovely folk, but the only books they read are like Pascal for beginners or something, and so you kind of think, well, so basically it was me at 30 changing my life really, and saying I'm going to take this seriously. Obviously, my novel didn't get published then, but I'd sort of met new friends. I'd had the time to write something serious. I'd started having short stories and poetry published, and that kind of continued. And coming on to like 21st century, God, we're in 2024 now, so we're talking about quarter a century ago. I've always continued writing, but I think I put it a bit on the back seat in the early 2000s because I had to admit it wasn't going to pay my way. I didn't want to be a performance poet or something like that, or I'm not, not an actor, so I just wanted to write really. So the good thing about that was it meant I could kind of focus on the things I like doing. So before we came on air, you said I've got a very kind of storied career really. I've done lots of things, and I've written everything. I did a blog for years. I've had edited a couple of magazines. I've performed regularly over the years. I had a couple of poetry pamphlets published in 2010, so quite a long time ago. And but that kind of poetry career never really took off in any way, although I still write poetry. And so I think I've had the freedom to write what I want, but at the same time, I haven't had the time to write the great English novel or whatever. So
great.
Yeah, so short stories are something that I've always found very fascinating as a medium, and I think I've always been quite good at. And some of my early publication successes. But yeah, so it's really nice to finally have a little book of short stories, and it's quite nice as well because it's a pamphlet, really. In poetry terms, it's 6 short stories because, as an unknown name, really, it's a hard sell to sell a book of 20 stories unless it's on a particular theme, or it's you're writing genre fiction or something,
Yeah, agreed. Now we better make people aware of what the book's called first of all, which we're going to talk about today, really. Which you just graciously told us what it is, and it's Levona's, which is due out obviously at the beginning of March. It's just coming out a couple of weeks after that, and you kind of sent over the preview to me, and I was absolutely spellbound by the book. It was. So it really was a great little book. And I said I just regard it as a proper collection of short stories. I never don't really do with pamphlets sometimes, but yeah. Now, obviously, we have to look back at where this came from. And first of all, I think there is a reoccurring theme in this story, but we'll come on to that shortly. Tell us first of all about the background of Levona's and where did this come from?
Yeah, well, the publisher is Confingo, who are a Manchester-based press, and I think they've done about 20 books now, actually.
I've just put on the website. Yeah, they have done a few. Yeah, they have done a few.
Yeah, the most well-known for similar small books, which are Dave Haslam's little essays, but they've published several novels. They did a book of short stories about Joy Division, and the guy who runs it is a guy called Tim Shearer, and I actually met Tim Shearer when I was doing my MA, because he'd done it the year before or 2 years before, and so we'd known each other a long time. But we'd sort of, even though we lived quite nearby each other, we'd sort of not really seen each other. And when my poetry book come out in 2010, he came along to it because he saw that I was in the brochure for the Didsbury Arts Festival, and we got chatting and we got back in touch. And he says, "I'm thinking of starting a literary magazine. Any advice?" Because he knew I'd done one. And I says, "Don't." So
the best advice.
He ignored it. But yeah, so I've had a couple of stories in Confingo. I think one of the stories in the book, Last Testament to a Lighthouse Keeper, was in an early edition of Confingo. And so I was on his radar. I think that's the thing. But he wasn't really looking for full collections, apart from, I think he's published a couple by Nicholas Royal, who's obviously got quite a big track record. Now, Nick actually chose a couple of my stories for his Best British Short Stories series in 2018 and 2020. which is a great honour. Basically, Nick is I'd call him a friend now, but he's a hard man to please when it comes to short story, because he may have read more short stories than any man in existence, I think. And so it was a great honour to be included in both of those. So I think I was on Tim's radar. So when he had this idea for these little books, and I agree, pamphlets is probably the wrong word. I think they're collectible editions, shall we say. The first one to be published in the series is by a brilliant writer called David Rose. And David Rose has had a story in the best English short stories of the 20th century. Is that kind of level of quality. David's a very interesting fella, because he used to work for the post office for many years, and he lives down somewhere south. I think he's retired now. But he's very well regarded, but has had not a very successful literary career out of it, even though he wrote a couple of novels. So his book was the first in this series. But Tim's idea was to match a writer with an artist of some sort. So they are genuinely collectible items with 7 or 8 coloured plates in each one. And the idea being that you might actually want to collect them, as well as you might enjoy the individual authors. And so he approached me out of the blue, really, and says, we're doing this series, and I'd really like you to be involved. And so I asked him a few questions. I says, well, do you want new stories? Do you want unpublished? And he very much said there was a couple of my previously published stories, like Last Testament to Lighthouse Keeper, and the story of the cat, which opens the collection, which he really wanted to include. But he says, I also want to include new stories. But in total, the collection has to be around, between 12 and 14,000 words, really. And some of my stories are quite long, 5,000-6,000 words. So that kind of, I went away and thought about it, and I put together almost like a short list, like putting together a mixtape, I think. And what I think I really wanted to do, and this is before we had the title of Loners, and before Steven, the artist, came on board, I really wanted, I was thinking, well, what would a small collection really do for me? And what, do I want my 6 most recent stories? Do I want them to be stories around Manchester or whatever? And actually, I thought, well, I've always considered myself, in some ways, an experimental writer. Even though I think my writing is very accessible, I've often used experiments in form. And so my view was that each of the stories should have something going on there that was a little bit experimental in some way. So whether that comes across is another question, but that was kind of my thought process. I was thinking of it kind of as an art project. Yeah, so that's how it came. And that was about nearly 2 years ago. We had that first conversation, and over that summer I sent him the first draft of stories, and then onboarded the artist, and then also made a couple of changes, and then like a bolt from the blue, the title of the collection just came to me as I was walking down the streets.
It's a great title, because when people read the book itself, books later, it's loners. The stories are all lone stories, but it's all about the people. And all the people in it are very much, I could be careful I say this, but the people are very sort of loner people, nearly, in a lot of ways. But it's not that sort. It's some very, very different situations as well. So, should we talk about stories then, to give people some hints of stories? Now, I said before, my wife's favourite story, which is obviously always was going to be the cat. So, tell us about the cat next, then. First of all, where the story came from. We don't have to give too much spoilers away, but just give people hints, I think, is a good term.
Yeah. I think I go 2 ways with titles. I ever have something that's a little bit obscure. I always like titles like, Catcher in the Rye and To Kill a Mockingbird. But I'm not adverse to have something that's very straightforward. And so by calling it The Cat, and what it is, it's a man in a flat who, out of the blue, sees out the corner of his eye a little cat appear, kitten, I guess. but he's never referred to as a kitten, is it? It's just a cat. And then he doesn't know how he's got in. Has there been a window open? Anyhow, the cat disappears, and he doesn't see him again until a couple of weeks later when he's tidying the flat because his girlfriend's coming round, and the cat reappears. And basically, I suppose throughout the story, the cat is it keeps growing as well. And I guess becomes more real as the story comes on, and more real to him as well. And so I had the idea because I think I just thought, what when you're in the flat on your own and you hear some odd noises, you kind of go, "What's that?" I think there's a reference to a previous flat where he'd seen a mouse or whatever, and I just thought, well, you kind of you don't quite know what's happening outside, and then and you're in a block of flats, and everyone's lives are a bit compartmentalized. So I think it came from that really, and then I had the idea of this, I suppose, the cat becoming almost like his familiar in some ways, I guess. So it becomes more and more important to him. I gotta say, without giving too much away, but the guy is, as I say, he has a girlfriend for a bit of it. He works for a bit of it, but then his life falls apart. So it's kind of the cat kind of becomes more important to his life as his life goes into more isolation and extremis. And so that was the idea. But writing it was quite hard. I originally started in the third person because if something happens to a character, it's quite hard to do that if they're in the first person, isn't it?
Yeah. It's just, I think doing it and trying to do what you did there in the third person, it gives it that distance sometimes. When you do first person, like you're all more immediately, aren't you, hands on? But yeah.
But so I ended up changing it to first person because the first version of this just wasn't working, and I did it and I got the voice, and once I got the voice, I thought, oh, this is brilliant, and I wrote it, and then I got to like the last bit of it, and I left it for about 3 months, but when I did finish it and worked out how I was going to do it, I was really pleased with it, and I'd say it's one of the few times I've written a story and immediately known that when I send this off to someone's going to publish it. Yeah. And it got published in a book called Anthology, which was like a perfect bound collection from Unthanked Books down in East Anglia, and with some really good names in it. And so that was actually the first time I'd actually had a story in a book rather than a magazine.
Wow. Oh, fantastic. No, because it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful, touching story, which I find really interesting because your second story, I think, in the book is probably the most experimental, which is that really interesting contrast, which is Sleeveless Itchery and Parched Throat, which I've seen in your Facebook page this morning. You described it as a 1,000-word unpunctuated monologue, which it is. So you've talked about already, aren't you? Some of your pieces have been experimental. This is probably the most experimental piece in the book for me.
Yeah, I've never been a great one for writing flash fiction, and a lot of my stories are quite long. But a few years ago, I was getting a bit aware that I was using the same tropes when I wrote, and particularly when you were starting things afresh. And I think, well, I had this idea of I'd write some 1,000-word stories that were maybe written in different styles or different genres. And because 1,000 words was bigger than a flash fiction, so there was enough words to do something, I felt, but it wasn't so big as being really daunting. And a couple of the stories in the collection began that way. So this one and Static Caravans both began as these 1,000-word stories. Now, Static Caravans, we'll come on to a bit, ends up being 3 times that length in the end. But Sleeveless Itchery and Parched Throat, which is essentially the monologue, the unpunctuated monologue of the way I see it as a teenage girl in care, basically. And you don't quite know why she's in care or what the situation is. She's obviously got some mental health problems. She's obviously run away at some point, and it's her monologue. and it really is just I guess, a piece of projection there, because obviously I'm not a teenage girl, never have been, and and so it was a really lovely piece of ventriloquism, and I think if it had been longer, I might have lost the voice, but because it's 1,000 words or just over, I think I managed to get the voice actually spot on, and there's actually quite, despite it being 1,000 words, there's actually quite a lot in the story, a lot of backstory, a lot of, and I think why I wanted it in the collection really was I didn't want all the protagonists to be male. I think that's fair to say,
Yeah.
and I think it offers, as you say, it's a bit of a turn from the cat, which is written in quite a plain, everyday language, and this is written in a more, she's making up her own words a little bit, like itchery,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it does. I think when you're doing collections like you've done like this, I think variety is the crunch to the story sometimes, key to the point. This, I think, is such a good contrast to what you've done before. And the third story I thought was a really interesting choice as well, was Last Testament of a Lighthouse Keeper. Now, there's two things I want to ask you about with this one. And we'll come on static caravans next, definitely. So I'm interested to learn more about that as well. Is first of all, then, what made you want to follow a quite experimental piece with Last Testament of a Lighthouse Keeper? Because that had a really cinematic quality to me that I could see that as a short film, actually.
um, I suppose the order of the books, we've talked before, Andy, about us both being into music. So I think we've kind of, we know what makes a good mixtape, don't we?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
And in a sense, every story in the collection is an outlier. Because this one's an outlier because it's the only one that's obviously not set in the UK. It's set on a lighthouse somewhere. In my head, it's set somewhere in the Nordic Sea, I think. It's there's a reference in the story to which I think was an article I'd read, which said that because of the melting of the Antarctic over the years, ships can now go above. Whereas previously they'd had to go round, the Mediterranean or Suez Canal or whatever, and now we're able to go over the top, which saved freight times. So there were a couple of bits like that which found their way into the story. But yeah, I think its position in the collection is it just kind of seemed to make sense to me there, really, because this one and Static Caravans are probably the most surreal, I think, aren't they? And they're both slightly apocalyptic, I think, in one way or another. Now, in this one, you've got essentially a lighthouse keeper, and it is like it says, it's the last testament, it's a journal, and it uses block paragraphs rather than proper punctuation. And every paragraph begins with the word "so."
Yeah, that really hit me, that did, because that was like interesting choice. So what made you want to do it that way then?
I think when I wrote it, and I'll tell you about how I wrote it in a second, because it is quite interesting. When I wrote it, I wanted to create a rhythm, really, and again, because it's a testament, I think I was thinking of it being almost like semi-biblical in some ways, or something like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, where it's quite repetitive, but it tells a story, and so it kind of created that kind of slightly mythic approach to what is it's probably the darkest story in the collection in some ways, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely.
because this guy is, and I think it comes down to, once I decided on the title of Loners for the collection, it was obvious this one had to be in there because obviously he's alone. But like all the characters in there, the reason why he's alone has probably happened before the story. So you find out that he's running away from something, which he thought he'd managed to escape because it's, you know, the world's going to pot. It's, and you know, and then during the story, he finds out that actually he's not managed to escape his past after all. So I'm leaving a lot of work to the reader there, I think, in that story. But the atmosphere of it is really helped by the short paragraphs and I read it out a couple of weeks ago at a reading in Stockport, and a friend of mine says, "How do you know so much about lighthouse keys and lighthouse keeping?" And because there is quite a bit of detail in there, and I said, "Well, I didn't research it. I just read lots of really weird stuff, and
That's what
when
I
I
was
start
wondering about, because
when I start writing a story like that, it's like making a meal, isn't it? You know, if you've got lots of coriander and garam masala in the cupboard, you put them in, don't you? And so I literally put everything I knew about lighthouses, or
right.
because there's a bit where you don't need lighthouse keepers now because it's all like digital with sat navs and stuff, you know, and so that becomes part of the story. But the story of how I wrote it, I wish they always happened like this. And I think this is why in my head it's in the kind of Scandinavian area, really. I was on a flight to Helsinki from Manchester with work, and it's a 2-hour flight with Finnair. And Helsinki is my favourite city. I love the place. And rather than listen to a podcast or anything like that, sorry, Andy, I thought rather than do any work, I thought, well, I've got these 2 hours. I'll try and write something. And I opened my notebook, and I had not a single idea. And then I wrote the first line. And by the time I got off the flight, I just about finished the story. And obviously, I revised it and changed it. But I wish it always happened that easy. And I think it was because I was in this liminal space, which I really like about flying, when you're in between places. And in my head, I was thinking of Helsinki, I was thinking of Scandinavia, and I was going across the sea. I think it allowed me to almost like just literally create this thing out of nothing. And that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, no, I agree. It goes that way. Me, some of the bits and pieces I can do is like, I think your brain is everything. It's not just the state you're in; it's the environment around it. Yeah, I think that's an important point of this piece, because there's a tightness inside it. That's why, where the mood, I think, as well. It's it's fantastic stuff, that piece. Okay, I said we'll move on now to talking about the surrealism. We'll keep going to surrealism now. So we're on to Static Caravans, which I think was a great choice to follow the songs. I think the mood, the context is very different. So tell us about Static Caravans.
So again, it began as a 1,000-worder. This was the one I really, really wanted to be in the collection. This is the one I really pushed to include, and I had to revise it loads and loads and loads. The original idea of it is a guy is on the 42 in Manchester, or going down Oxford Road, or going to I think he's got a job at the Amazon warehouse in Wimenshaw, and basically he's there, and the batteries, he's a bit old fashioned. He's got a Walkman, and the batteries run out, and he suddenly realizes the person behind him, who he hasn't noticed at all, is talking, but not just talking, he's talking directly to him, and he's telling him to give up his job and go to the sea. And it's kind of a story about what makes people run away from their life and follow maybe an apocalyptic vision. And so basically, next few weeks, he gives up his job, takes all his money out of the bank accounts. There's a bit of conspiracy there. He takes notes of government addresses like Porton Down and places like that, and then he basically catches the train to the Welsh coast. It doesn't say where on the Welsh coast. It just other people are already there, and they're all waiting for the rapture, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people are in chalets and stuff near the beach, and has booked a static caravan out of season, which there's hardly anyone else there, so he's totally on his own. But he also constructs an imagined life. He cuts out pictures from the Argus catalogue or of a happy family, and he frames them and pretends that they're his family just in case anyone asks. So it's about someone running away, and you never quite know why. And then, obviously, at some point in the story, they're all looking out to the sea and waiting for the rapture. I'll leave it there, really.
Yeah. I think the other thing that struck me with this was, and I could have seen this been the title of the book actually in a way as well, bizarrely with this book. I think Lona's is a better choice for it straight away. So yeah, but you're dead right. It's another fantastic piece. Now we'll move on to the last two pieces, I think, anyway. So now I really enjoyed the letter, which came next as well. And tell us about the letter then, because again, I think this has got a lot of trickery in this story as well. I mean, I've read this about 3 times, and each time I got a different meaning of it. Would you believe?
Yeah, I'm so pleased people like this story. I really am, because it's the most recent one in the book. So it's the only one that was written since Tim initially asked me to put together a collection. Although Static Caravans was changed a lot, and A Cold Night for Drowning was revised quite a lot. I basically a couple of years ago I went up to Scotland for a holiday, and I realised I'd never been to Dundee or Aberdeen, and I haven't been to Scotland for a few years as well, since before the pandemic, and I love going up there. Really, I'm not someone who goes to the Highlands and does all that stuff, but you realise you are in a different country, and and so the story is a travelogue, but it's a travelogue with a reason. It starts with the guy who's on his own. He's a man probably in his late 50s, early 60s even, who's an accountant. He's an accountant who was quite high powered, I think, early in his career, but his career stalled. He's now divorced as well, and he's got a letter from the hospital basically on the table, and he leaves it there and books this trip back up to Scotland, because on one of his first work trips 30 years before, he went up there, and his job as an auditor was to sort of count the oil platforms, and to because they were kind of the assets of the company.
Mm.
And so he revisits the place that he had these memories, really, I guess. And the idea behind the story is just something I've been trying to do more recently. Is I like the idea of a story where you could actually tell the whole of someone's life. And so I think bit by bit you get the whole of this guy's life in the story. So that might be what you picked up on by the second and third reading.
Yeah, because it's very
uh,
nuanced the way it's done. So yeah, it's more. I think it's probably the most subtle like your pieces in this book actually. But again,
Yeah, nothing much happens, which is why I was really pleased that people have liked it. And it's really quite mundane way. He's obviously, again, although it's in the third person, it's written with a sort of you get the feeling he is an auditor, because he's very detailed. He when he arrives in his hotel in Aberdeen, he describes the triple ply of the window to keep the noise out, and stuff like that. Yeah.
really nice. It's great stuff. Okay, we'll move on to the big finale in the book now, which has certainly got the most striking title out of the 6 of them, and A Cold Night for Drowning. And I think is this possibly the darkest piece in the book? Do you think, or?
It's really interesting, because I was into there was a review of this on North Manchester FM yesterday by
Oh,
Hannah's
Hannah!
Bookshelf.
Oh, Hannah did it. So I'll have to check that out. I love Hannah.
Yeah, and she was very complimentary about the book, which I was very 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 honoured for that, really. She actually says she found it quite optimistic, as a story. But I guess, this is the one where you will put a trigger warning suicide on it, I think, because it is mentioned. And it's the oldest story in the book. And it was published many years ago in the magazine that I used to run called Lamport Court. It has been revised a lot because it needed it really. But the actual story is pretty much as it was, and it's one that people have always liked, and I think I write quite a lot, but I don't think I'm some. Well, as your listeners have probably got the idea, I don't just write the same thing time and time again. As some people are great at ploughing a particular furrow. With me, I'm always trying something a little bit new, and I think every now and then I have what I'd call a hit single, and The Cat was a hit single, and I think A Cold Night for Drowning was a hit single as well, quite a while back, because the first 2/3 of the story is literally the guy just telling you about his life really, and it's quite minutiae, and he's kind of explaining why his life's failed. Really, I think he's probably that he's not a serious person. That nothing ever seems to happen to him. There's a wonderful story by a Spanish American writer called Philippe Alfo, and in his book called Locos, he writes this story about a man who exists but no one notices him, and he's going to throw himself off a bridge, and because he's about to throw himself off a bridge, someone actually notices him and talks him down, if you like. But then what happens is that his identity gets taken by somebody who then has a successful life with his own identity. I'm really fascinated by the idea that certain people light up every room that they come into, and certain people are like ghosts, and I think we all feel a bit like that in our life. So the story really is about that, and but the opening it is a bit of a crib from Saul Bellows, The Adventures of Augie Marsh. Just the first couple of lines where he describes himself as I'm Chicago born, and I wanted to kind of say almost like a piss take of that, really. But then the actual plot of the story, as I say, it's good to keep it hidden away, is really the last quarter of the story after he's admitted that he was once serious about things and he was serious about potentially taking his own life. So, yeah, but it is optimistic in the end because he does connect with people. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a good choice to finish the book off with this one anyway. Certainly, if nothing else, with the title of it, because I think if you'd put that as the opening piece in the book, I think it would have probably could have been. I would hate to do it with too much, but it was the right choice. You're leaving people with something to think about at the end of it with the book. Now, it's fantastic stuff indeed. So,
yeah, it might just. I know we're going to do a bit of reading a bit, but it might be worth just reading a line from the end of that story. Actually,
that's fine. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
He basically says, I may be alone, but I'm not uniquely so. The bridge, the river, the pills, none are ever so far away as now.
That's a great line. That.
Yeah, I wrote this story when I worked at the university many years ago, and I got a job, which meant a lot of the time I had actually got nothing to do. So I actually wrote this in a windowless office at the University of Manchester. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, because it's got that sort of inwardness again. It lights up the lighthouse piece in a different way. The story does. It's like there's something trapped in it. I think it's trapped in all of them, really, but that one particular. So, no, it's fantastic.
I think that's what I noticed. I actually write a lot of stories which are more like kind of twofers, where there's two main characters and they bounce off each other. And so I was trying to work out how come the 6 stories here are all about one person. And obviously I chose the stories and then came up with the title Loners because it obviously fitted really well. But then I realised because they're relatively short compared to some of my other work, They are more concentrated, you know. But I
Yeah.
think the thing they do have in common is exactly that. They're loners, not because they are weirdos or freaks or whatever. They're loners because of the situation that has kind of happened to them. And I think possibly what's slightly different about me than maybe some other writers is the story is not about the thing that's happened to them. It's about the reaction to the thing that's happened to them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you completely, and it does it. That's what makes this book so it's a fascinating book. It really is, Adrian. So, okay, conscious of the time now, so we'll do the wrap up part now. So, I don't want to go too much because people may check you out. They know you do a load of music as well. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that's your next project, really, isn't it? But I think you've got a few readings on the go about this book as well, haven't you? As well.
Yeah, I think you wanted to. You mentioned it's worth saying that it was a collaboration as well with Steven Heaton.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Um, so Stephen is an oil painting an artist who uses oils, and I approached him about being my collaborator on this, and it's worked really well as a collaboration. I think uh, two or three of the I think there's six pieces plus the cover that are paintings in there. I think two or three of them are ones that he did in direct response to the stories,
Oh, did he?
but they
Oh,
are
wow.
yeah. So, but they are all abstracts, his work, and he uses like geometric forms. But what I liked about it as well is he also his canvases are taken from like old bits of wood found in skips or old books bought from
Oh, yeah.
auction, and so they makes the oils on that, and they're very warm. And I approached him, and he's quite a well-known artist in the Greater Manchester area, and I was very pleased that he liked my work and he was happy to collaborate on it. Really, so yeah. So what we're trying to do is obviously a book like this, you want to get a bit of attention to it, really. So we'll, you know, the book launch will have taken place by the time this is broadcast. But it's what we're trying to do is over the next 3 or 4 months have a number of opportunities for people to maybe come and ask us questions or talk about it. We'll probably do a signing at the gallery that he's represented by as well. Likely to an online one because there's a few people from elsewhere outside of Manchester who might like to hear us. And it'd be really nice to do a reading or two outside of Manchester, possibly where I grew up, although none of the stories are set in the Midlands, possibly even in London. So I'm just keen to actually use this as a bit of a calling card over the next year. Um, One of the interesting things about writing a book like this or putting it together is it does create a little bit of a writer's block with you because you're thinking, well, what should I be writing next? You know, should
Most,
I be
yeah.
writing another short story or should I be writing? I don't know. Yeah, yeah. But because they are so different, um, I feel like now it's out there and people are beginning to respond to it. I can just treat it as a project that's kind of completed. So my next projects really are I'd really like to finish the novel I've been working on for 5 or 6 years. And as you say, I also do quite a bit of music, and I recently released an album, but I've still got quite a lot of unreleased experimental instrumental music, which I'm working out. I'm going to package that really as probably a next album later in the year, really. It's interesting. I'm really into music, as you know, but I think the only music reference in this book is a Crowded House song, which is used a bit
Yeah.
ironically.
Yeah, that's a point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, you've been a musician yourself. So, yeah, it's a good point, mind you. But I think sometimes if people know you for your music, it's kind of just as clever not to actually put any music references in it.
Yeah,
That's a no,
yeah,
no,
and
great.
I do, I do, I'm always getting ideas for stories but if I think about the two or three that I've been writing most recently, they're all quite experimental. They're quite weird. They're not realist stories particularly. Um, and yet the next big work I'd like to do, to finish the novel I've been working on, but also work on a new one, is actually probably closer to the letter in many ways. written in a kind of quite a realistic form. So the way I see this really is, I see that I think you get into your 50s and you're not someone with just one very narrow interest. You know, you've got various pathways, and I think the reality is that you run those pathways in parallel, really.
Yeah, I do. I think that definitely applies to me because I'm in my 50s as well. And when my various pathways all stayed separate and they've all intermingled in probably past two
Yeah.
since lockdown, really. And I know I've agreed with you, same point in that as well. So, anyway, Adrian, I'm conscious of the time. I want to give you time to do plenty of reading for us. So, give us a hard sell then, mate. Where can people find out more about you then, first?
Yeah, so Loners as a book is
Oh,
basically
by the way, we should make it clear. YouTube and Instagram exclusive now. You can see the cover.
yeah. So we've said the video of this if the video stream works okay. Book's called Loners. It comes out from the Manchester Press Confingo. It's a limited edition, I would say. You know, it's not a massive run. But Confingo have now got it on sale. Their website is www.confingopublishing.uk. No co, not com. And you can get it from there. At the moment, you can get a signed edition, but you have to. I think if you don't get a signed edition, then you can always track me down, and I can get one for you. So it will be available there. Probably look out for my name at various events over the next 6 months or so. I'll try and kind of do a few readings, both from the book and probably some of my poetry as well. But I'll obviously have the book with me. My own website, adrianslatcher.com, does have the details and information. And also, I have a Substack, again called adrianslatcher.substack.com, which I started about a year ago. One of my parallel tracks, as Andy knows, is I basically spend most of my life raiding the charity shops of South Manchester for more books than is good for me.
That's true.
DVDs. And the idea of this Substack is it's a monthly, I suppose, cultural digest, really. But yeah, it's at adrianslatcher.substack.com. Is another way of finding out what I'm up to.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Adrian. We'll wrap up part one here, mate. I want to give it time to do a bit of reading. This has been a fascinating chat today. So it's been, considering I said before, when I ever do spoken label, I don't always know the people. And we've met, 2 or 3 times, I'm guessing, haven't we, in about 15 years? But I've come way, feel like I know your life story today. That's always a good time. So thanks again, mate. Right, everybody, come back with us because you're going to enjoy part 2. Take that from me.
Yeah.
See you on 2 shakes of the dice.